Good evening, everyone. So welcome to the VA-VR last minute revision. VA stands for verbal ability and VR stands for verbal reasoning. I'm sorry we're starting a little bit late. Usually it is because I'm technically incompetent. So we're not going to be solving a lot of questions today. However, we are going to be solving the kind of questions that you definitely need to be familiar with to get anywhere far in the exam. So we're going to do a bit of grammar and we're going to do a lot more of the verbal reasoning variety of questions. Of course, the session is meant to be participative, so I am going to keep an eye on the live chat. So if you have any queries or if you want to respond, that's how you do it. All right, so let's get started. I hope that we are all good to go. You will need some pen and paper if you want to participate. So in some questions, there might be some bit of writing or drawing involved. I'm just giving you a heads up. So it's a good idea to be prepared. Let's get started with the grammar portion first. This will not take too long. And the reason that we're doing grammar is that these are really quick questions in which you can get marks fast. And even if you don't really know the concepts, absolutely, certainly, you can still probably figure out what the answer is based on your reading or your sense of what sounds right. Of course, if you know the concept, you have a greater likelihood of being right. All right, so let's get started with the first question. As you can see, there is a part of the question that is underlined. You need to see whether you want to change the underlined part. So pick from amongst one of these 5 options. Or you can also say that there is no replacement required, in which case it means it's already correct. Okay, so I can see that the responses are coming in. The reason that I have picked this question is so that I can talk to you very briefly about tenses. Okay, I know that it's not something that we like to listen to. However, most of the options that I see have picked either option 2 or option 3. Option 2 obviously is the more popular one. So there are 2 things we need to take care of. The first thing that we need to take care of is subject-verb agreement. That's a very basic thing. So subject-verb agreement is figure out the subject. Here, the subject is the banking industry, which is singular, right? So the moment we know that the subject is singular, we can eliminate a few options right away. For example, I will definitely not say have already begun, right? Because industry have will not work. So option 3 is cancelled out to begin with. But what I wanted you to look at is, what tense is it? Can you identify it? I mean, it's going to be a very, very short and quick lesson on tenses. But I do want you to pick up on this particular tense because this is the only one we're confused about. Had begun, what tense? Okay, so this one is past perfect. What I wanted to emphasize is that whenever you use the past perfect, there are usually 2 or more than 2 events in which one event is happening before the other. Okay. Now here we are not talking about 2 events. It's only one thing. So I should not be saying had begun in any case. Of course, it is also wrong to say had begun already. I mean, that's a secondary problem. But past perfect is used to say that one thing happened before another thing in the past. So please remember that whenever you say had been, had begun, this indicates that one event happened before another in the past. Otherwise, don't use the past perfect. So here clearly we have to eliminate the original answer. So we have to get rid of option 5. Now, will began. This is a ridiculous option because will indicates future and began indicates past. So this is out. Began already could be versus has already begun. So why would we not pick the first option? The banking industry began already incorporating. So one of the things is that whenever you have words like already, often, always, typically we put these words before the verb and not after. So you would say that I've already finished everything instead of I have finished everything already. I mean, you can, but usually we would put it before that. So we would end up therefore picking option 2. Now, whenever we pick option 2, you may not really know the tense here. The tense here is obviously the present perfect. So since we've talked about the past perfect, I also want to talk about the present perfect again very quickly because this is something you can use. Has begun, have done, all of these are present perfect. So this is used to refer to something that has already been done either in the recent past or at an indefinite time. Like when you say, I have read this book, you're not indicating the time. Or it could also mean that I have read it recently. So here, since we have an indefinite time frame, therefore, it's a good idea to say has already begun. So there are multiple ways of solving it. I just wanted you to focus on the concepts. So please remember how to use the past perfect and how to use the present perfect. Let's move on. Since it is last minute revision, the idea is not just to solve questions, but also to get our concepts cleared again in case you've not gotten them cleared the first time. But yes, option 2. Now let's move on to the next question. Please read this, see if you can figure out the answer. So the reason that I pause is that there is a bit of a lag between what I'm saying and what you get to hear, unfortunately. So it takes a while for me to actually see your answers. Now, here, we have to locate the subject because, again, we have to deal with the verb, right? Has never been more difficult. What has never been more difficult? Maybe predicting how an industry will fare. Will fare means predicting how an industry will do further down the line. Yeah. So a lot of you are saying option 5, no replacement required, but some people have also picked option 4. So let's look at the tense. Will fare further down the line, right? So we're clearly talking about predicting something about the future. So it doesn't really make sense for me to use the past tense, but let's start with the basics. Our subject is singular because we're talking about predicting something. So I should get rid of option 1, have been more difficult or have never been. Now, if I use option 2, could be, right? Predicting how an industry will fare further down the line is most difficult because. Why would we not say is more difficult? I would probably not pick it because whenever you use the superlative adjective most, we would say is the most difficult. So there is an article missing here, and that's the easiest way to eliminate option 2. That leaves us with option 4 and 5. Had not become more difficult because of. However, there is no place in the sentence where we are using the past tense. And if you recall, we have already discussed that had become is past perfect. this indicates that this happened before another event. But since no past events are being discussed, obviously we cannot use option 4. So option 5 is the correct answer. So please remember, has never been more difficult kind of also means that in general, even today, it is difficult, and in the past also it has been difficult. So past perfect can also indicate something that happened in the past and still applies to the present. So that is a third usage of the past perfect. Sorry, the present perfect. But what you need to always keep in mind is that if the story is being narrated in the present tense, more or less, then do not dramatically switch to the past or the future unless there is a reason to. So we would not pick have because of subject verb agreement. We would not pick the past tense because the rest of the sentence is not in the past. So option 5 is correct. Let's move on then. All right, please try this out. Should be fairly simple. Okay. The reason you might find me glancing sideways is that I'm kind of also checking the responses while I wait. Okay. Now, the reason that I picked this question is to illustrate a very simple point. There are a lot of verbs that do not take the ing ending. So words like find, okay, I know that a lot of us say that I am finding this, but it's wrong to say that because either you will find something or you will not find it. There is no, process of finding. There is a process of searching, of course, but no process of finding. So please keep that in mind that there are certain words in which we do not use ing. Now, does anyone have any idea what kind of words we normally do not use ing for? Any idea what kind of words we do not use ing for? Okay, so I'm going to give you a list and you see if you can figure it out. All right. Now here, words like these, which generally do not involve a physical action, these words are typically not used with an ing. Typically, okay, there are some very weird exceptions to the rule, but most of the time. So when people say that I'm loving your dress, in everyday speech, maybe this is okay, but in formal English, this is incorrect. Similarly, finding is not something that is used with an ing. Or Let's say I am hating this class. Either you hate something or you don't hate it. Okay, there's no continuous process of hating. So a lot of these emotions are not expressed with an ing. Similarly, you might say, I am not understanding anything. It's a very common response. But here again, either you understand or you don't understand. There is no continuous process of not understanding. So the correct way to say it is, I do not understand. So this is one thing that I wanted to point out, that there are certain verbs for which we do not use ing. Typically, these are verbs of emotion, perception, appearance, ownership. Emotions we've already done. Perception is when something looks or feels a certain way. Appearance again, seems, appears, or even looks. Ownership, when you have, own, or possess something. All right. So now, having understood this, or even without having understood this, we can definitely find the answer. So it's not correct to say, I am finding for the first time. Let's look at our options because we always eliminate them, right? So I would have to eliminate option 5, no replacement. Me finding for the first time. See, I is the subject, me is used as the object. So it cannot really be the first option either. Plus it has a finding. I did found. This is another point that I did want to emphasize. Whenever you use do, does, or did, do, does, did, this is typically followed by the basic verb. What it means is, I do see, he does see, he did see. So I've seen a lot of people saying, I did not saw that, which is incorrect because after did, we do not need to use the past tense. The past tense applies to the helping verb here, which is did. So please do not say this. It is, I did not see that. So after do, does, did, just use the basic verb, don't change its form. Now, keeping this in mind, we can definitely eliminate the second option. So this is out. Now, let's look at the third and the fourth. Both of them look pretty good. So which option do you think will work? As we settle into another long summer, I have found that for first time. Now, whenever we use any sort of ordinals, first, second, third, normally we would say the first, the second, the third, because it's a very specific time. So we can eliminate this on that basis simply. It has to be the first time, which is why our answer should be option 3. All right, let's move on. We have only about 5 questions, okay? So it's not going to be a lot of grammar. We're going to move straight to reasoning after this. So this is the penultimate question. Penultimate is the second last, ultimate is the last. So please take a look at this. This is very simple. All right, let's get started. So as I said, simple questions. So you don't really need to worry about too many grammar rules here. So the hospital is singular, right? So we would normally be okay with saying that the hospital restricts. So when I say that the hospital is singular, you need to remember that the singular verb ends with S. That is why we say he speaks, but they speak. So singular verb ends with S. Therefore, we would have to eliminate this particular option. It is wrong to say the hospital restrict. So option 5 is gone. We will need a replacement for sure. Now let's look at the first option. The hospital restricting the number of visitor. The number of is typically followed by a plural noun. So we cannot say visitor. So this is out, even if we are not looking at the tense. Restricts the number of visitors can work. So let's keep it. Restricted the number for visitors. Could be. I mean, I'm not eliminating it now. Let's keep this as well. Restriction for number of visitors. Now, why can it not be this? What I wanted to point out is that whenever we have any word with tion, this is a noun. It's not a verb, okay? It acts as a noun. So if we say the hospital restriction for number of visitors who can enter the intensive care unit, then the first part doesn't make sense. What does the hospital do? We have to use a verb form. So it cannot really be this. So this is out. Let's eliminate the last option. Sorry, this fourth option. Now we have two options left. A lot of us might be able to say, okay, number 4 visitors is not correct, but there is a tense related rule that I wanted to point out. It says who can enter the intensive care unit, right? Can means that it is in the present. It is a general rule. So the present tense is typically used for anything that is generally true. Sometimes they're called proverbs, sometimes they are scientific facts, and so on. So anything that is generally true will take the present tense, which is why option 2 works. Option 3 therefore gets eliminated. Also, it is number of something. It is not number for something. All right, let's move on to the next and the last grammar question for today. All right, this is a slightly different concept. So please take a look at it, evaluate your options very carefully. All right. Now here, the concept that you need to learn about is parallelism. Parallel construction basically demands that whenever we have multiple things in a sentence that are being joined. So what are we joining here? We are joining multiple actions. For example, abandoning prayers. This is one action. Springing to my feet is another action. Opening the door for them is another action. Then there is an or. To keep them waiting in the rain until I had finished. So there are a lot of things happening in this sentence. Now, whenever this happens, what you need to check is how many parts are there in one series. How do I check that? Look for a construction that is either X and Y, or it might be X, Y, and Z. It could be X and Y or A and B. So X and Y here would need to be similar and A and B would need to be similar. So parallelism demands that things that serve the same function in a sentence must also more or less be similar in form. So let's look at our sentence here. There is an or, okay? So before or, we actually have three actions happening. So the way that I read this sentence is X, Y, and Z, or that's how I'm going to simplify it. So X, Y, and Z need to have a similar form. After or, we have to keep them waiting. But this is not something we need to worry about because this will have to retain the same form, right? So let's look. To abandon my prayers seems good. To spring to my feet also seems good. But the last part does not start with a to, and that is where we have a problem. So ideally, if it had said to abandon, to spring, and to open the door, no problem at all. All right. So let's now evaluate our options. The first option says to abandon, to spring, but there is a to missing here. So this is the same as the original. So option 1, cancel. We have a to here. We do not have anything here. And we do not have anything here. So let's worry about 2. We'll come back to it. 3 says for me for abandoning my prayers. But here we do not have springing or opening. It needs to have the same form, right? So if it is abandoning here, it should be springing and opening here. So 3 is out. For me to abandon my prayers, spring to my feet, and opening the door. This is a problem because the remaining words do not have an ing. So 4 is out. The 5th one, for me to abandon, spring to my feet, and to open. So we have 2 in the first part, 2 in the last part, but we have nothing here. So ultimately, we are stuck between 2 and 5. Now, in such situations, you should remember that if this were a very simple sentence, then we would have said, I love to eat and drink. Why is it okay to say that? Because the 2 is taken as common. This means I love to eat and to drink. We don't have to repeat it necessarily because both of these are part of the same sequence. Or I could have said, I like to eat, drink, and be merry. This is also okay. So I don't have to say to eat, to drink, and be merry. So the 2 still remains common, which is why option 2 will work. To abandon, to spring, and to open, it's all right if we don't repeat the 2. We can take 2 as common right at the beginning. So instead of picking 5, where we have 2 at the beginning, 2 at the end, but not 2 in the middle, it's better to pick option 2 where we can take the 2 as common. So again, something that will intuitively strike us, but please look for parallel construction. Parallel construction can take multiple forms. So if you're using an ing in one part, use the ing in the second part, and so on. All right. So now we get to verbal reasoning, which is majority of what you will probably have trouble with. Now, in verbal reasoning also, we're not going to do the very simple questions. For example, we're not going to do course of action and so on. What we have done primarily is the statement conclusion sort of questions, of which there are many varieties. So you'll see that I've tried to incorporate a lot of variety in verbal reasoning. But at the same time, I'm not specifically going to cover syllogs or course of action. Let's get started. So the directions might be a little different for each question. Please look at the first one. Fairly simple. You have to read this paragraph and you have to choose which conclusion or conclusions follow. Think about it a little bit. Okay. So now, what we need to focus on is what the story is. A cop walked in and out of 3 malls. The cop had a revolver, but the weapon was not detected at all. Now, when it says choose which conclusion follows, you need to ensure that you do not generalize. Okay, that's the major danger in most of these questions. So, how many malls did we cover? We covered 3 malls, right? Then it says that in these 3 malls, the weapon was not detected at all. But based on that, we cannot say that in general, the security at malls is ineffective. So the first one will not follow because it is a generalization. So this is out. Let's look at the second one. What if we say that service revolvers do not come under the ambit of security cover in malls? Ambit means that it is within their purview. I'm going to try and find a simpler word for purview. Basically, that service revolvers are covered when they search for weapons in the mall. Okay, so they're supposed to be able to search for service revolvers. So, what we are trying to say is that despite the guards and the metal detectors and everything, the weapon was not detected at all. Why would we say that? The reason that we would say that is that they are supposed to detect the weapon. If the service revolvers are not within the purview of security cover, then the last statement does not make any sense. Then they would not even try to detect the weapon. So, while statement 1 is a generalization, statement 2 must be true in order for us to make this second statement here. Despite the guards' metal detectors and the frisking, the weapon was not detected. In other words, it was supposed to be detected. So, while 1 does not follow, 2 does follow. Now, unfortunately, I'm not really able to see your doubts because for some reason my chat is not updating. However, I'm going to try and look at what I can do to correct it. Anyway, so for now, let's move on to the second question. Second question of the verbal reasoning part, of course. Please try this out. Okay, let's look at this one again. I am trying to figure out how to update my chat. So maybe I'll be able to manage this time. Just a sec. Okay, I'm able to see things now. Alrighty. So over here, what we're trying to say is that sometimes it's more difficult to deprive oneself of pain than of pleasure, which kind of means that we can get addicted to pleasure, but we can also get addicted to pain. That is why it's very difficult to deprive oneself of it, right? So if I simplify this, and that is something that you should try to do, I mean, simplify means you should explain it to yourself. So one may get used to, or maybe let's use the word addicted to, pain as well as pleasure. See, if something is very difficult to get rid of, it means that you have a deep attachment to it, right? So does that mean that pain and pleasure share common characteristics? Could be. But the problematic word in the first option is the word often. In the original question, it says sometimes, right? Sometimes is not equal to often. And because of that, we should say that one does not follow. So if one does not follow, we can get rid of this, we can get rid of this, we can also get rid of this. Now we have 2 and 5. I don't know if you're late. I mean, I'm a little late because I've not been able to see the messages, but we've just started verbal reasoning, so I think you're here at a good time. All right. Now, there is a chance that a lot of you will say neither 1 nor 2 follows. But here, when we simplified the original statement, why would it be difficult to deprive yourself of something? Because you have formed some sort of an attachment to it. So option 2 does follow. Because if you are not attached to pain, then why would you find it difficult to get rid of it? And therefore, the answer here is option 2. So please be careful. In these questions, you do need to think, even if the question seems like it's very simple. So I know that most of you will have about 30 to 40 seconds to solve these questions. Yeah. But most of the time, I think about 45 seconds is enough for you to at least figure out maybe about 60 to 70% of these questions. All right, let's move on. Question number 3. Short question, but give it some thought. Simplify it. Also, whenever they use when or if or unless, okay? When, if, unless. These are basically conditional statements, okay? So be careful about conditional logic. Okay, So the reason that I wanted to remind you of conditional logic is that whenever it says when, it's basically an if X then Y sort of logic. All right. So I'm not going to go into the details of that. All I really wanted to point out here is that when it says if X then Y, the reverse is not always true. So if X then Y does not mean when Y then X. All right. So based on this, you should be able to eliminate the first option. It does not mean that whenever you're absolutely wrong or right, you are absolutely alone. Okay. So that's not going to work. Now let's look at the second option. Everybody other than you is either absolutely right or absolutely wrong. Okay. Sounds a little tricky, right? But this is not talking about you. It is talking about everybody other than you. So if you are right, does it mean everyone else is wrong? Not really. If you are wrong, does it mean everyone else is right? Again, not really. So regardless of your status, we cannot comment on other people. Therefore, option 2 will not follow. So neither 1 nor 2. So I hope sorry about that glitch. So let's move on. What I was trying to say is that it's trying to imply that when you are in a particular phase, then it means that other people are holding a certain other position. So if you are X, then the other one is Y. That's kind of what it's trying to do. So all that I'm trying to say is that here, it's not really about whether you are alone or whether everyone is against you. What I'm trying to say is that there is no way that we can derive anything about other people. Okay, that's all it is. We can only derive whether you are wrong or whether you are right. We cannot comment on other people at all. Alrighty, let's move on. Okay. This one again is fairly simple. Just read every word carefully. All right, I believe we have a few responses. Okay, now we are talking about the universe and human stupidity. And we are saying that only two things are infinite, right? But then the author is also saying, I'm not sure about the former. In other words, the universe. So if I simplify it, what are we really saying? We're saying that the universe may be finite or infinite. Yeah, this is what we're saying about the universe. What are we saying about human stupidity? Is infinite, for sure. So based on this, we can say that the universe may be finite. So one follows. Yeah. Human stupidity is timeless and spaceless. Well, it depends on how you define infinite. So when we say infinite, it means that it is not time bound, nor is it bound by space, that there is no limit to it at all in any dimension. And therefore, we would have to say that both of them seem to make sense. Both 1 and 2 follow. Any questions about this? About why we have said both? I think the first one is fairly easy to derive. Timeless and spaceless is derived from the word infinite. That's all. Okay, let's move on. Now, so far, how? So far, we were talking about conclusions, all right? Now, we are talking about assumptions. Why the second one? Okay. The second one is not even mentioned. All right. So here, I'm going to ask you, do you understand what infinite means? What does infinite mean? No, I mean, I'm not talking about it mathematically, right? I'm talking about in terms of normal English. What does infinite mean? In normal English, it means that there is no foreseeable limit. That's all we're trying to say, right? So when it says that human stupidity is infinite, it means there are no limits to it. Yeah. So that is why the second one follows. So infinity is equal to timeless and spaceless. So infinite basically means there are no limits to it, right? If there are no limits, it means that there are no limits, limits of time or space. That's it. So the problem with these questions is equating X to Y, right? So you are supposed to equate infinity to timelessness and spacelessness. Moving on. What I was saying earlier was that so far we were talking about conclusions, yeah? And now we are talking about assumptions. Honestly, I don't think that there is a major difference in the way that you solve. And sometimes they also get these things mixed up. But it is a good idea to be careful and ask yourself, what is the difference? So when we say conclusion basically is, if these are true, then what can I infer? Okay, so it's, I mean, in very simple mathematical terms, it is like saying 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Yeah. But when they say assumption, then it is like asking yourself, what must be true for the given statements to be true? The assumption is always in the middle somewhere. It is not the end result. So here, it is like saying 2 plus what is equal to 4. All right. So this is a way to understand the difference between conclusion and assumption. So the assumption is like a missing premise. It has to be true in order for us to say whatever we are saying. The assumption is also a belief of sorts. So here, what must George Bernard Shaw believe for us to say this? And yeah, it would be a good idea to just write Q5 because there is a lag, so I'm not sure which question you guys are responding to. Okay. Let's simplify what this person is saying because it's very complicated language, right? So if I wanted to simplify it, I would say without university education, philosophy, etc., will be misunderstood. That is what the sentence actually means. That a fool's brain digests philosophy into folly, science into superstition, and art into pedantry. Yeah. Hence, university education. So basically, we're saying that education is important so that this does not happen. Yeah. So now, the first one, just because it says only, does not mean you eliminate it. All right. The reason that university education is important is that if you are a fool, you will not understand. Okay. So, yeah, unfortunately, it is Airtel. But apart from that, let's continue. What I'm trying to point out here is please do not eliminate an option just because of the word only. In this case, the word only is important because if you are educated, then you're not a fool. And only if you're educated will you able to understand these things. So the answer, in fact, is the first option. Only one is an assumption. Sincerely sorry. I might have to change my network provider. So this is going to be the last attempt. In case it doesn't work out, then I'm officially going to give up on this revision session. So this was where we got stuck the last time. Maybe it's because we're talking about the United States and Pakistan. Maybe, this is not something we're supposed to talk about. So what we have to understand is why they have set up a joint mechanism to fight terror. What must be true for them to do this? So first of all, let's look at the first statement. In order for them to set up a joint mechanism to fight terror, number one, Pakistan itself should not be a terrorist state. If Pakistan is a terrorist state, then collaborate with it. So the first one is definitely an assumption. It must be true for this action to have been taken. Secondly, why would the US want to collaborate with anyone else if there is no need for it? So the second one must also be true. If there is absolutely no need, then a country is not going to set up a joint mechanism. And therefore, for this, both 1 and 2 are going to be assumptions. Both of them must be true in order for this decision to have been taken. All right, moving on before there are further glitches. So please remember that an assumption is something that has to be true in order for these statements to be made. So it's like a precondition. It's not something we derive from the facts. It is something that these facts are based on. So take a look. Okay, now step 1. When we say that top Indian business school techniques are likely to find their way to government schools, what does it mean? It means that these business schools are going to train the teachers in these schools or the employees in these schools. That's basically what is being said. Further, to ensure that teachers can effectively use those skills, teachers will be put through an intensive training module designed by the B school. So the sum of it is that the B schools are going to train government school teachers in using these techniques. So why would they do that? Obviously, these techniques must be relevant at the school level, because if they are not relevant, then this training is pretty useless. So statement 1 must be true for them to impart this kind of training. But let's look at the second statement. Government school teachers are not skilled enough to teach the school kids. Now, this might seem like an assumption. We think, oh, we must train people because they are underskilled or they are unskilled. But it's not really that. They are being trained on something new. It's not that they are not skilled enough. It is just a new sort of training in a new sort of methodology. And therefore, we cannot say that government school teachers are not skilled and therefore this training is being imparted. So the first one must be true. The second one does not necessarily have to be true in order for us to take this kind of action. So only one is an assumption. Let's look at question number 8. I think this is fairly easy. So try it out. See if you can figure out the answer to this. Okay. Now, We learn by example and by direct experience. This is the first part. So sometimes it helps to break it down. There are limits to the adequacy of verbal instruction. So if I translate it into simple English, what we are really trying to say here is that words cannot teach us some things. Yeah. So ultimately, because we cannot learn everything by instruction in words, therefore, we learn through direct experience and example. But that does not mean that we cannot learn by verbal instruction. This is a generalization. What we are saying is that there are limits to the adequacy of verbal instruction. So it is not necessarily true that we cannot learn at all. So option 1 cannot be true. Now, the second one, we learn only through example and direct experience. Look at the first statement. We learn by example because there are limits to verbal instruction. But it does not mean that we learn only through direct experience. We can still learn through verbal instruction as well. So we cannot exclude any of these forms of learning. And therefore, the answer would have to be neither. Neither of these have to be true in order for us to make these statements. So on the whole, I think this is a very, very simple question. Let's look at this one. This one not so easy, so please think about it a little bit. And also, you do need to know the meaning of bewildering, overlook, and invent. I had said that you need to look at the vocab here, okay? So when we say, after all, one knows one's weak point so well, that means writers know their own weaknesses. And we have to look at it from the writer's point of view. So this is the first statement. Then why would the author say that it's bewildering to have critics overlook them? Bewilder. What does bewilder mean? Confused? Baffled. Yes, that's a good word. Thank you. So it is confusing or baffling to learn that the critics have a completely different point of view. So a lot of these questions rely on your knowledge of usage of words. Bewilder means that it is confusing. Why would it be confusing? Probably because you know yourself well, but someone else is judging you in a very different way. So, could the first one be true? Yes, it could be. Another word that should support this view is that critics overlook these weaknesses and invent others. See, when we invent a story, excuse or weakness, we are not talking about inventions in the usual sense of the term, right? It basically means that it is fake. So this is the significance of the whole thing. What we have to understand here is that the critics are inventing weaknesses that the writer actually does not have. So option 2 or statement 2 here is definitely going to be correct. So this one is a check. And when we say that critics invent other weaknesses, it also means that the critics are not able to judge writers correctly. And that is why the writers are bewildered. So a lot of this question hinges on your understanding of the word invented others. Anything invented is fake or untrue, and therefore our answer should be both 1 and 2 are assumptions. So a lot of you said 5, neither 1 nor 2. So please understand that in some cases, you can interpret statements at face value. In some cases, you need to read a little more deeply and look at the significance of certain words. All right, any confusion about this one? Then let's move on. Okay. Now we move on to fun things. We also have to understand that these are syllogistic questions in the sense that the format is somewhat like a syllogism, but you don't necessarily need to draw Venn diagrams. You can do it logically without that as well. So please try this out. Now remember, definitely true is something that you're 100% certain of. Definitely false is also something you're definitely convinced is false. Okay, so it is wrong. Probably true and probably false is something we will come to when we come to. So in most syllogistic questions of this sort, it will either be definitely true, definitely false, or data is inadequate. Because there's really no scope for us to pick probably true or false in these question types. Okay, my drawing is really bad. Uh, so probably true, false in these kind of questions is just for time pass, because you should see that this is basically a syllogism, right? In certain other questions, they will be relevant. So here, if we say that some soft drinks contain harmful toxins, for example, these are soft drinks and they contain harmful toxins. Yeah, this is kind of what we are saying. Then we are saying water is not a soft drink. Now, problem here is that water is not a soft drink, but water can contain harmful toxins. In fact, it is possible that all sorts of water contains harmful toxins. So water can be here and water can be here as well. The only condition that it's putting here is that water is not a soft drink. So water cannot be a part of the soft drink circle. But that is not to say that water cannot contain harmful toxins, right? So it can be here, here, or here. So what is your answer going to be? If there are 3 possibilities. If we were looking at it in a syllogistic way, then the conclusion we would be looking for is something like this. Water may or may not contain harmful toxins. When we say may or may not, do we know whether it is more likely to contain or less likely to contain? We don't. There is no way to say whether it is 50-50, 60-40 or 40-60. So the answer here is going to be data is inadequate. Option 5, which as far as I can see, no one picked. So please understand that whenever there is uncertainty in a syllogism-based question, uncertainty means that we really cannot say. We cannot say whether it's true or false. It may be true, it may be false equally. And therefore, we will have to say data is inadequate. Don't be afraid to pick that option. Alrighty, let's move on to the next one. Again, syllogistic. And again, the sideways glance is because I'm looking at your responses. Come on, this one is super easy. Okay, let's get started. First of all, here we do not need to draw. But yes, I'm glad to see that some of you have gotten the hang of it. So the reason it's super easy is that we are talking about Mukesh. Mukesh is an MBA. Mukesh is a successful businessman. However, based on that, we can't generalize, right? We can't say MBAs are successful business people. So why can't we say that? Because we don't have data about the rest of the MBAs. We just have data about one MBA. So again, the answer here is going to be data is inadequate. I mean, you can draw it, but in this case, you're just going to waste time when you draw it. So please remember, when you have evidence for one, you cannot generalize it to many or all. And that is why we'll say data is inadequate. Here, you cannot even say probably true or false, because the moment it takes the nature of a syllogism, it will either be definitely true, definitely false, or data inadequate. Okay. It is only when you have those paragraph-based questions where you can pick probably true and probably false also. So for now, let's move on to the next question. All right. Now here, this is not a syllogism. In this case, all options are possible. So evaluate this carefully. Okay, so I see a lot of right answers. Well done. Let's take a look at what is being said. Now, the clue here is most tourists. Most tourists visit the Taj Mahal before leaving India. Mr. Williams and family came to India for tourism and left last week. So, if you're saying most people visit the Taj Mahal and Mr. Williams and family are a part of those groups, then we can say that it is most likely that Mr. Williams and family did visit the Taj Mahal. Why? Because of most tourists. This makes it seem as if it is more likely to be true than false. This makes it seem as if it is more likely to be true than false, because if it did not say most tourists, then what would we have done? Now, data is inadequate, possible, but we will have to eliminate the definitely true and definitely false options because we cannot be sure whether he did go or he did not go. The reason that we are saying that data is not inadequate is that it tells us that it is very likely that he would have gone. What if it was not most tourists? What if we change one word? Let's say some tourists. Now, what would our answer have been if it said some tourists? What do you think? So now, the moment it says some, we don't know if this number is 5%, 10%, 40%, 50%, or even 80%. Some could also mean most or majority, right? So then we would have said data is inadequate. No, then we would have said data is inadequate. You know why? Because we don't know what percentage actually goes. If it had said 90% of the tourists, this tells us, yes, it is very likely that Mr. Williams also went. But the moment it says some means that at least one tourist definitely went, but it could be any number. And that is why most tourists is very, very important. So please read these words. Let's move on to the next one. So yeah, the answer was option 3 in case you missed that. I think this is a situation that a lot of you can relate to. Be careful with this one. This is conditional logic again, so I hope you don't forget. See, a lot of these questions follow patterns, okay? But you're not looking at the pattern, guys. So it says only X is Y. This is the pattern. Do you know what this really means? The percentage is a prerequisite. But just because you meet the prerequisite, do we know about other conditions? We don't really know the other conditions, right? Only X is Y means that Okay, going back to conditional logic. Now, the only reason I'm persisting is that we're almost at the end. So there are just two more questions that I wanted to cover. Please remember that just meeting the preconditions does not really mean that you are allowed to take the exam, because we don't know what the other conditions are. It is simply that. So, in the end, whenever you have only X is Y, it does not mean that all X is Y. Only people with 50% can take the exam does not mean that all people with 50% can take the exam. So in a situation like this, again, because this is syllogistic reasoning, it's not going to be probably true or probably false, because we don't know how many other criteria are there. And therefore, ultimately, we need to either be able to say definitely true, definitely false, or data is inadequate. Yeah, so the other conditions cannot be inferred at all. But what I want you to understand again is that the moment you spot conditional logic or syllogistic reasoning, you have to be able to say, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. It has to strike you immediately. So, since it basically means that he may or may not have met all the requirements, we can't really say whether Ranjit is allowed or not allowed. So, same logic, since it's syllogistic reasoning, we say data is inadequate because we don't know about the other conditions. All right. Now, since we are doing this, I am also going to give you a couple of others at the end if you stay put and the internet is gracious to me. But for now, let me just try and complete the last two questions so that I get a feeling that something happened. All right. All right. Please take a look at this paragraph. Yeah. Finally, this is the kind of question in which you end up wasting a lot of time. All right. So generally, I would believe that if you have a very good reading speed, you should go for a question like this. Otherwise, I would probably just try to mark an answer and move on. Okay. These are the kind of questions that take up unnecessary time. Read it, see if you can figure it out. All right. So let's now look at what the company is doing. There are certain words that you need to focus on here. No preset agenda. It's a general discussion forum. Designations are forgotten. All right. And you can have a free conversation with anyone regardless of your position in the company. Yeah? So the company believes that satsang is an effective management tool. Could be, I would not eliminate it. The second one, it believes in fostering the spirit of dialogue. Again, could be, more or less. Why? Because it clearly says that designations are forgotten, right? So it's not a position-based debate. So could be. The third one, interpersonal problems. We don't really know about the past. So option 3 we can eliminate. The fourth one, the company is concerned about its reputation. See, we don't really know why these satsangs started. So it's not apparent that it is to protect its reputation amongst employees. So maybe we can get rid of the fourth option as well. So nothing about the past, nothing about the reputation. So anything that contains option 3 and 4, we should be able to eliminate, right? So we should definitely get rid of this. We should probably get rid of this and this as well. So that leaves us with pretty much only one option, which is 1 and 2. So even if you're not very sure, you can still mark this as your answer. So I hope you work with option elimination, guys, because if you do that, it's very, very simple. It has to be 1 and 2 because clearly 3 cannot be part of the answer. Okay. Any questions about this one? Alrighty, let me just give you one last sample question and then we can end for today. This is complicated. Why is it complicated? See, it's a combination of statements implicit, right? Implicit means it is not directly stated, but it can definitely be inferred. So why did we eliminate the third option? Because there is nothing about interpersonal problems. It's not interpersonal, it's actually interpersonal problems in the past. The past is not talked about at all. So even if I can eliminate option 3, I should be able to say, okay, it's not option 5 and it's definitely not this, right? So after that, it's a matter of picking from one of these options. All right. Now, last question for the day. If you have understood more or less what I have said, then I think you should manage the right answer. Just give me a sec. All right. Take a look at this question. Okay. So first of all, again, it's syllogistic reasoning, right? So for this, you should draw a Venn diagram. And I'm sure you learned how to do that, right? So I had a Venn diagram in place. Some politicians are honest. So we are talking about the politicians who are honest. No politician ever refuses bribes, right? So this cross here indicates that these two circles cannot overlap. No politician ever refuses bribes. So these two cannot overlap. Some honest politicians never refuse bribes. So since honest politicians are also politicians, this part, there can be no overlap between these and the circle of people who refuse bribes. So the answer here should obviously be the first one. Yeah, absolutely. See, it's very simple, okay? Some politicians are honest. So there is intersection between politicians and honest people. No politician ever refuses bribes. So clearly, politicians and refuse bribes cannot overlap. Therefore, the politicians who are honest, which is this middle section right here, the politicians who are honest, they will, they will not be a part of the circle who refuse bribes. Or is it confusing? Okay. So here, what I wanted you to look at is these two words. So no politician ever refuses bribes. So I told you that on the whole, these two circles cannot overlap. Now the problem is interpreting this particular one. So most of you have said that the answer is 1. Yeah. Let's interpret this. Some honest politicians never refuse bribes. It is equal to saying some honest politicians always take bribes. We could interpret it this way. So now, what do you think the answer will be? We're talking about the middle section. So will they refuse bribes or will they not refuse bribes? So what is the answer going to be? Is it going to be definitely true or is it going to be definitely false? It can only be two things, right? It's either definitely true or definitely false. Data is inadequate is not really going to work here. Okay. So in this case, sometimes one word can make all the difference. Most of you said that the answer is 1. However, if you really think about it, can honest politicians ever take bribes? No, not really. So in this case, the answer actually seems to be definitely false. So let's end with this. Syllogistic reasoning most of the time is very simple, but every once in a while they will try to confuse you. Don't get caught up in these things. Mark an answer, move on, because you don't really have time to think through all of this stuff. Sometimes even the Venn diagram might be confusing or may take time. So as far as possible, try to be quick with the Venn diagrams. If it's confusing, again, mark an answer, move on, because time is of the essence. So we stop here. Honestly, there is a lot of vagueness in the verbal reasoning section for the CET. So anything that is conditional logic, anything that is syllogistic is something that I would definitely want to do. Anything that is paragraph based, I may not want to do immediately. I might either want to come back to it or mark an answer and move on, right? So make sure that at all times you do not spend too much time. The reason that I didn't take up parajumbles is that it's something that you're used to. Again, within parajumbles, there are those which are complex, and then there are those which have options and therefore are not very complex. The parajumbles which are practically optionless, the ones in which you have to make the entire sequence and then it asks you what is the first, second, or third sentence, they tend to be time consuming. So I would go for the parajumbles, which typically give you options A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Pick your questions carefully. Logic is going to be a large part of the exam, so that is what I would probably want to work on in the time that I have left. So LR, VR. All right, that's all for today from my side, folks. See, honestly, no one knows what the breakup of question is going to be. So on the whole, all that we can go by is to say that verbal and LR is going to be a major part of the exam. Recently, we have seen a lot of verbal reasoning based stuff. So if your verbal reasoning is strong and logical reasoning is strong, then I think you should do well. As long as you don't get caught up with questions, that is the main point. Okay, wish you all the best. And I'm sorry about all the glitches. Definitely, something that I need to look into. Bye-bye.